Weeks 1 to 3. Monahan and Barsom argue that film has become a powerful, influential, and sophisticated form of communication, entertainment, and art. A complex form of artistic representation and communication in just over 100 years. Pages 2. 1895 is the year that the Lumiere brothers held the first public exhibitions of films on a screen in front of a large audience in Paris, Fr. Movies became known as the seventh art. Medium, a means by which something is communicated or expressed. Q. What is the nature of a painting as a medium vs film as a medium? We often travel to museums like the Louvre in Paris to see the original version of, say, the Mona Lisa. They might suggest movement, but they are always still. Mass medium, diverse arrays of media that reach a large audience via mass communication technology that allows communication with a mass audience to take place. The grammar of film cinematic language has proven to be highly expressive and highly influential. These elements include narrative form, cinematography, editing, and sound. Cinema derived from Greek word kinesis, aka motion, with movement. Coined by the Lumiere brothers, who called their combination motion picture camera projector the cinematograph. They created a camera that could capture motion, so the name reflected that. From their term we get both cinema and cinematography. Film comes from fact that movies were shot on celluloid film strips from 1890s until recently. Q. What's the film that is largely credited with having given the digital revolution its final push? Avatar. There is nothing about the term narrative that implies fiction. Q. What are the basic components of cinematic language? Shots. Editing. Shots are combined with other shots to create scenes, scenes are combined with other scenes to create an overall form, often a narrative form. Director decides what shots are necessary to create his film. Editor is the one who combines these shots into a form that captures the structure, the look, and the feel that the director is searching for. Much of the meaning in film can be invisible to the untrained eye. Fade in, fade out quickly and efficiently suggests the passage of time and a shift to a new scene. Low-angle shot often has the effect of portraying characters as strong, noble, or threatening, depending on context. Cutting on action has the effect of masking cuts and allows editor to shift to new shots, new perspectives, introduce new information, etc., without being noticed. Hard cuts are edits that are meant to be noticed and can be a little jarring. Many films have implied political, cultural, and ideological messages to them that can be hard for viewers to spot precisely because these viewers are products of the same society that the films and the filmmakers are. Films often feature cultural invisibility. The protagonist is the central character of a narrative, the character that sets the narrative in motion and propels the narrative to its conclusion. In Hollywood films, the protagonist is usually the embodiment of that sense of fierce individualism that is such a key aspect of American culture. Usually such protagonists find their way toward a clear and satisfying resolution. Films come with explicit meanings, which are out in the open and easily understood. Pages 12. They also come with implicit meanings, which lie below the surface of a film's narrative and its presentation. Pages 12. Formal analysis takes into account all the elements of cinematic language, narrative, cinematography, editing, mise-en-scene, sound, etc. 3 approaches to movie making. Narrative movies. Documentary movies. Experimental movies. On the other hand, works that are based on true stories and actual events but have been embellished, dramatized, or reorganized in order to satisfy our desire for compelling stories. Oppenheimer 2023, Dr. Nolan. Experimental movies shun the conventions of fictional narrative filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, although they sometimes overlap with these other forms. Experiment with new techniques and new forms of expression. Animated movies. Pages 96 to 101. One of the most important forms of filmmaking. History dates back to earliest years of film. Most are essentially fictional narratives. Home movies. Millions have been made since the 1920s. One of the most significant forms of filmmaking, just as amateur photographs are one of the most important forms of photography. The roots of so much of today's online video culture. People go to see films for all kinds of reasons. Stars, directors, types of film, genre, French word that just means kind or type. They agree that certain films seem to resemble one another in significant ways because they share traits, themes, approaches, etc. When people consider the topic of film genres, they often think in terms of fictional genres, such as superhero films, sci-fi films, horror films, musicals, spy thrillers, romantic comedies, muscle car films, war films, gross-out comedies, westerns, film noir, etc. While modern gangster narratives have expanded to include a wide range of stories set within the milieu of organized crime, classic gangster plots typically follow this rags to riches to destruction formula. More than virtually any other genre, film noir is distinguished by its visual style. Noir movies employ lighting schemes that emphasize contrast and create deep shadows that can obscure as much information as illumination reveals. Most science fiction films are not really about science. Instead, the genre's focus is on humanity's relationship with science and the technology it generates. Like science fiction, the horror genre was born out of a cultural need to confront and vicariously conquer something frightening that we do not fully comprehend. In the case of horror films, those frightening somethings are death and insanity. The Wild West is a land of opportunity, both a dangerous, lawless country in need of taming and an expansive territory where anyone with the right stuff can reinvent himself or herself and start a new life. The things that define a genre are called conventions, pages 77 to 79. Content is the subject of a work of art. What the work of art is about. Form is how the content is expressed. The means by which the content is expressed. Parallel editing creates illusion that all three sequences are taking place in the same place at the exact same time, while heightening suspense will our daring hero make the rescue in time. Persistence of vision refers to the afterimage left in the brain for a split second after one has ceased to see an object with one's eyes. Film is capable of the dynamization of space and the spatialization of time, pages 35. Think of how events taking place at a variety of different times appear to be taking place simultaneously. Polaroid photograph is fading to white and not fading into full color the way we expect. Common themes of the Western: civilization versus wilderness, order versus lawlessness, the settling of the frontier. Some scholars have discussed a pattern when it comes to the development of genres. Formative period, period of maturity, revisionist period, parody, cycle, a batch of genre films that enjoyed intense popularity and influence over a distinct period. The Great Train Robbery helps to establish the genre in 1903, and is the most successful pre-1910 North American film of any kind. Period of maturity, from John Ford's Stagecoach 1939 into the 1960s. Many important movies were made and the genre attracted many top directors and top stars. Highly successful, and sometimes highly acclaimed. Synonymous with Hollywood cinema. Highly influential internationally. In 1970s, as Western fell into decline, its conventions began to appear in other more contemporary genres. Rogue cop vigilante justice films. Dirty Harry 1971. Death Wish 1974. Taxi Driver 1976. Science fiction films. Star Wars 1977, revisionist period, 1950s to the 1970s. Weeks 4 to 6. Narration is the act of telling the story. In every movie, the camera is the primary narrator. A first-person narrator is a character in the narrative who typically imparts information in the form of voice-over narration. First-person narration: I walk into the room and I see the gun. Second-person narration: you walk into the room and you see the gun. Third-person narration, she walks into the room and she sees the gun. The protagonist is the character at the heart of a story. Many protagonists are anti-heroes. They aren't entirely noble, they are flawed, they are complicated. Many films begin with a sense of the normal world. Some sense of relative order is established, but this order will soon be disrupted. Pages 116. Round characters are complex characterizations. They may possess numerous subtle, repressed, or even contradictory traits. Flat characters are two-dimensional characterizations. They are relatively uncomplicated, they exhibit few distinct traits and do not change significantly as the story progresses. Most narratives introduce a person, group of people, creature, or force that is responsible for obstructing the protagonist's attempts to achieve their goal. The climax comes when the protagonist faces the crisis. Narrative structure typically has three-act form. Pages 116 to 120. Act 1, Setup. Exposition, establishes character, setting, and tone, then introduces a goal with an inciting incident. Act 2, focuses on the protagonist's pursuit of the goal and the conflict and obstacles that must be confronted before the goal is either gained or lost at the peak of the rising action and stakes. Act 3, conflict is resolved, storylines get tied up. A film like Out of Sight is quite a bit more convoluted than this. Story and plot are actually very different things. Pages 121 to 123. Story consists of 1. All the narrative events that are explicitly presented on screen plus 2. All the events that are implicit or that we infer to have. For instance, sound that comes from within the reality depicted on screen is known as diegetic sound, non-diegetic sound. Example: the score to a film which we hear, but the characters pictured on screen do not. Ellipsis, the omission of material from a narrative that is seen as being superfluous or easily understood from contextual clues. Example: we don't have to show a person sleeping for 8 hours to indicate cinematically that they've gone. Color schemes are used to help the viewer make sense of different places, times. Story duration is the amount of time the implied story takes to occur. Plot duration is the elapsed time of those events within the story that the film explicitly presents. In other words, the elapsed time of the plot. Screen duration is the movie's running time on screen. Story order by definition flows chronologically. Plot order, on the other hand, doesn't have to. Monahan and Barsom, cinematography is the process of capturing moving images on film or a digital storage device. Pages 180. The cinematographer uses the camera as an expressive instrument. Shot. Take. Setup. A setup is one camera position and everything associated with it. Film stock. Pages 183. Black and white and color film. Formats: 8mm and Super 8mm amateur and experimental. 16mm professional, but lower budget. 35mm standard for most professional filmmaking. 65mm and 70mm widescreen. IMAX super widescreen and immersive. Academy ratio 1.33:1. Dominated 35mm filmmaking from the 1930s to the 1950s. Widescreen era takes off in the 1950s. Black and white films are not pictures that lack color because black and white are colors. Pages 187 to 190. Black and white was the standard until the 1930s, and it remained the most common type of film until the 1960s. Three colors are primary: red, blue, green. If we subtract colors from white light, we can also create every color in the spectrum. Technicolor represents state-of-the-art in color filmmaking in the late 1930s. Key light is often used to create sense of glamour. Three-point lighting system. Pages 159 to 160. One source lights characters from the back, heightening definition. Backlighting. One bright source highlights what's most important in the scene. Key light. One source provides light that is less bright, but helps fill in details. Fill light. Film noir is characterized by tendency toward low-key lighting and a short focal length lens, wide-angle lens, wide perspective. Deep focus, can distort if lens is very short. Long focal length lens, telephoto lens, brings distant objects close, can compress space. Medium focal length lens, often known as normal lens, corresponds to our normal perspective. Zoom lens, variable focal length lens, allows one to shrink or enlarge focal length in one continuous motion. Dutch angle shot, tilted away from typical horizontal and vertical position, creating impression of imbalance. Pan shot, the horizontal movement of a camera mounted on the gyroscopic head of a stationary tripod, short for panoramic shot. Tilt shot, the vertical movement of a camera mounted on the gyroscopic head of a stationary tripod. Dolly shot, shot taken from camera fixed to a wheeled support, generally known as a dolly. Summary relationship, screen duration is shorter than plot duration. A long period of time is conveyed in a short period of time. Real time, screen duration corresponds directly to plot duration. The period of time suggested and the way it is depicted are equivalent. Stretch relationship, screen duration is longer than plot duration. A short period of time is conveyed in a long or longer period of time. Editing is the selection and arrangement of shots and sounds. Film editors determine what you see, how long you see it, and the order in which you see it. The technique of editing, cutting the desired shots from the exposed roll of film or digital storage device, then joining them together into a continuous whole. The very earliest films were single-shot films. One of these filmmakers theorists, Lev Kuleshov, discovered a number of phenomena connected to editing, including creative geography and what became known as the Kuleshov effect. Q. What did Pudovkin learn? The exact same shots can have an entirely different meaning if arranged differently. Week 7 to 10. Editing is used to manipulate the presentation of plot time on screen. Flashback. Flash forward. Most films are based on an invisible approach to editing known as continuity editing, pages 283 to 294. More commonly, films will switch back and forth between a single character and an omniscient point of view. The filmmakers of the French New Wave were among those who popularized new approaches to editing that were at odds with the continuity approach. Montage, the French term for editing. André Bazin, montage is the creation of a sense or meaning not proper to the images themselves but derived exclusively from their juxtaposition. MacGuffin, an object, document, or secret within a story that is of great importance to the characters of the story, but turns out to be of little importance to the narrative. Monahan and Barsom, the movies engage two senses, vision and hearing. Although digital filmmaking transforms sound into a digital code which is embedded in the digital recording medium, Alfred Hitchcock switched over from silent to sound cinema with relative ease. Screwball comedy, slapstick comedy based on physical comedy, is displaced by comedy of witty, rapid-fire dialogue. Gangster film flourishes in the 1930s when sound enables colorful dialogue. By colorful characters, dramatic car chases, and explosive machine gun shootouts. Actors are a big reason people choose to see films. Film culture has been oriented around stars since at least the 1910s. Movie stars have been among the world's most recognized celebrities ever since. M&B provide an evolution of screen acting, pages 233 to 243. Early screen acting styles. Silent film acting, D.W. Griffith and Lillian Gish. The influence of sound acting in the classical studio era. Method acting. Screen acting today. Technology and acting. Actors of the classical Hollywood era were often tightly controlled. Restrictive, long-term contracts with studios were the norm. Producers and directors frequently exerted a great deal of control over performances. Major roles aka, main, featured, or leading roles. Supporting roles. Bit players small speaking parts. Extras non-speaking, background artists. Cameos small but significant roles often taken by famous actors or famous directors. Walk-ons even smaller roles, reserved for highly recognizable actors or personalities. Personality actors actors who take their persona from role to role. Actors who deliberately play against our expectations of their persona. Chameleon actors actors who seem to be different in every role. Actors who are often non-professionals or people who are cast to bring verisimilitude to a part. M&B, casting is the process of choosing and hiring actors for both leading and supporting roles. Pages 243 to 244. French New Wave pages 364 to 7. The godfather of this movement was André Bazin. Dogme 95 aka, Dogma 95 pages 369. Time to coincide with cinema's 100th anniversary in 1995. Dogme 95 aka, Dogma 95. Conceived quite specifically as a realist film movement. Conceived quite specifically as a rejection of the dominant mainstream cinema. Among other things, the goal was to democratize filmmaking by making it more attainable to filmmakers around the world. In the end, 35 certified Dogme 95 films were produced, 1998 to 2005. Realism. Gritty, realist aesthetic makes the film's many painfully awkward moments even more awkward. Dardenne Brothers. Their realist aesthetic. Cinema of long takes and sequence shots. Preference for shooting projects in strict chronological order. Minimal use of professional actors. Frequent use of non-professionals. Shun the use of scores or conventional soundtracks. As approaches to filmmaking, realism and anti-realism are often at odds with one another pages 42 to 44. Formalism, when style and technique in a work of art are heightened or given precedence over issues of content. Dramatic camera movements, angles, lens choices, etc. Elaborate and unusual lighting. Extreme patterning. Special effects. Assertive editing. Mannered acting. Q. What are some of these tools and conventions that are used to further distance film from reality? Fast and slow motion. Fades, dissolves, superimpositions. Reverse motion. The sudden inclusion of still images. Distortions through the use of focus or filters. Some of the films we've watched so far this semester have featured striking formalist elements and the occasional experiment with anti-realism. These include Memento 2000, D.I.R. Nolan. Psycho 1960, D.I.R. Hitchcock. Blowout 1981, D.I.R. De Palma. Anti-realism formalism. The next two films are well known for their striking formalist elements and their experiments with anti-realism. Rushmore 1998, D.I.R. Anderson. 2001, A Space Odyssey 1968, D.I.R. Kubrick. This planimetric shot avoids arranging characters in receding diagonals as approaches to filmmaking. Realism and anti-realism are often at odds with one another pages 42 to 44. Formalism, when style and technique in a work of art are heightened or given precedence over issues of content. Again, French New Wave films were often gleefully realist and anti-realist, switching back and forth from one mode to the other. It's about a particular kind of shot that Bourdelle calls the planimetric shot. The camera stands perpendicular to a rear surface, usually a wall. The characters are strung across the frame like clothes on a line. Sometimes they're facing us. Sometimes the figures are in profile. Sometimes they face away from us. This planimetric shot avoids arranging characters in receding diagonals. Auteurism. Auteur-directors saw themselves as much more than just screenwriters. The idea was to give a great director the same or a similar amount of credit as you would a great author, especially a great novelist or a great artist, who display a profound cinephilia, a profound love of cinema. Some characteristics of the auteurist art cinema of the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s. Objective realism. Subjective realism. Formalism and or anti-realism. Reflexivity. Elliptical narratives, ellipsis used to make the narrative more challenging to understand. Ambiguity, ambiguous scenarios, ambiguous endings which lack resolution. Authorial commentary, a powerful sense of the author-director's presence.